Okay, one more tutorial video this week for part 3 of the lab, which is covering executing code to create a figure and then saving that figure for future use. The figure we are going to make is just a simple bar graph, also called a bar plot, to get a quick summary of our data, and we're going to use the plot function. And in particular, what we're going to do is look at the number of individuals from each of the two different California abalone farms, MAC and CAF, included in our data set. So we'll go back to our Week1Lab script, start a new line, and again, we want to use that plot command, and what we want to type is plot, and then parenthesis, and then the name of the data set. So remember, when we import the data, we gave it the name abalone. So abalone here is telling RStudio which data set it needs to use to create our graph. And then this $sign indicates, anything after the $sign indicates what column of that data set we want to use to create our graph. So if we are interested in this particular graph in the farm column, so remember, if we go back to our data set, it has two different columns, the farm column and the daily growth column. For this particular graph, all we're interested in is the farm column. So in our plot code, we need to tell RStudio that's the particular column we want to graph our data. So if we go back to our script file, type plot. This is another thing you can autocomplete too. If you hit tab, it'll pop up for you. We want to plot our abalone data set, specifically the farm column. Again, that'll autocomplete for you. It'll give you the options within that file. If we execute that, now that has run in the console, and if we look now in our, scoot this over, our bottom right panel now in the plots tab, we have a bar graph here. So what it's giving us is for the two different farms, Monterey Abalone Company and Coulthard Abalone Farm, how many individuals are in that data set from each of these two farms. So that's what the y-axis is, but right now we don't actually have a y-axis label, which is confusing. If you were just to export this graph, you wouldn't have any idea what the graph was actually showing, especially with these two different abbreviations. So what you can do then, if we scroll down in the directions, is add additional code to that plot command that'll add access labels. So if we wanted to add on, we could just copy that same code we had before, but now we can type a comma and tell it we want to use a label for our y-axis. So the way to do that is you type ylab equals, and then you put in parentheses whatever you want that axis to be called. So we'll say number of individuals, because that's what it is. This bar graph is showing us how many individuals are in the data set from each of those two farms. Execute that, and now we can see that our bar graph has been updated. So now we have a y-axis label here, number of individuals. If we wanted to be really thorough, we could also add an additional code to give an x-axis label. And if you want, as you're typing in your R script, you can add in comments. So you can say for here, for instance, that imported the CSV data file. This looked at the first 6 lines of data set. Rough initial plot, bar plot with added y-axis. So now let's also add an x-axis. ylab equals, comma, xlab equals, and let's call that abalone. Call it California Abalone Farm. Execute that. And now we see that we have an x-axis label as well. So the next thing to do, now that we have this plot is currently within our studio. If you closed our studio, this plot would not be saved, but we want to save it for future reference. For instance, you will need to save this to include it in your Week1Lab report. This is the main end product that you'll need to include. So what we want to do is go back to our instructions. So we're going to call this particular graph Week1BarPlot. So what we'll do is go back to this plot's bottom right panel. We'll click Export, Save as PDF. I always save as a PDF because the quality is better. If you save it as an image and then try to use it for publications or posters, which I've done in the past, the quality isn't as good. So I save as PDF. I would also recommend clicking Landscape for the orientation. Directory, we want to save it in that same new 178 RStudio Lab folder we created. The default name rplot is not helpful at all, so we'll call it Week1BarPlot. And I've already done this, so I'm not going to save it, but you would click Save, and then if you go back to your files now, that is going to show up here in your directory now because you've saved that file. That file is now on your computer. You can use it for your future lab reports or whatever else you want to use it for. So that really is the end of the lab. Before you finish, make sure that you have saved your script file. So everything that you typed in here is saved. I should probably add a comment, bar plot with Y and X axis labels. Save that. Make sure your plot is saved, and then you can go ahead. So congratulations, you've completed the first Week1Lab. I know working with RStudio the first time can be a little bit challenging. I definitely remember that for myself, but hopefully you were able to keep an open mind and recognize now that you're starting to gain familiarity with this. And if you still are really confused or stuck, please reach out to me, let me know, and I will definitely help you. But I know that you all can do this. So just remember, even though it's hard, you all can do it. I know you can. So now you've completed the lab, go to Canvas and find the lab report template for you to fill in and answer a few questions related to this lab, including inserting your bar graph that you created.